Sorry about that. Just wanted to get people's attention. We will talk a little bit about hiring and all the rest. So, spoiler alert, I'm going to talk a lot. Somebody made the mistake of telling me I had 20 minutes to fill, and I'm a bit of an overachiever. So I'm just going to talk really fast. But if you miss something, don't worry. I'll make the content available later. Somehow we'll figure it out. Any views are my own. They're not my employers. Don't try to get me fired. If you have questions at the end, that would be really great, just so we can bounce through. I'd say one thing that gets everybody in this room together is receiving a message like this. I think we've all received 10 million variations of this, which is a rejection letter. Really vague. And I don't know about you guys, but anytime I've gotten one of these, it has seriously pissed me off. Because software developers as a whole are solutions-oriented people. I don't see the solution to solve here. I don't see a problem that we could work on. And that's kind of deliberate on the part of companies, but I'm here to help you today. I've been on both sides of the hiring desk more times than you've had hot dinners. And I want to show you a little bit of insight of what happens on the other side of the black hole. Once you send off your application and it disappears forever, there is actually some thinking and consideration on the other side and a decision process. Before we get into that though, speaking as a hiring manager, I want to give you some context. The context is hiring is really, really risky. Headcount and budgets are shrinking. This year alone, there's been 250,000 jobs laid off in tech, according to TechCrunch in October. 2023 isn't over yet. And bear in mind that's 50% more of the amount of people who were left off in 2022. So I mean, that's kind of concerning as a manager, right? We got to do more with less people, and that's really hard. But it also means we've no room for error because we need our people to be working on hitting our goals, dealing with clients. We don't really have the time to send people on quests for hundreds of years to find the perfect candidate. So we try and be selective of what we do. And there's two kind of challenges with it. One is cost, and the other is what makes a good hire doesn't necessarily make a good employee. It sounds tricky, but we'll get to it. When we look at cost, time is a cost, and a massive time sink. If you want to hire for one position, you've got your startup costs, which is putting together a job description, getting that approved, getting that posted, and maybe there's like ads that go out for and all the rest. And then you got to create a technical test if you don't have them already. That takes a bit of time. You got to get that approved. Maybe you'll get somebody on the team to actually take the test just to set a benchmark, and then you go ahead with that. And then we have this lovely long list of per applicant time you will spend. I'm not going to go through each part, but what I will say is there is an awful lot of steps to get to a candidate you want to hire. You got to remember that hiring is a funnel. So if 200 people enter at the top, you're kind of lucky if you've got 2 or 3 at the bottom that you can choose from. But it's still a big time sink across all your staff, all the way throughout. The other cost is, of course, money. And when you look at the salaries that we offer people, and I've put some examples here, 40, 50, 60, 70K, that's not what it actually costs the company. It actually costs significantly more because straight away, your employer has to pay a contribution for your social security, they got to pay for your benefits, they got to enroll you in all the insurance plans. If you use an external recruiter, depending on your relationship, you pay 15 to 20% of them. You obviously have to get them the machine, get them licenses, and all the other fun stuff. We take the example of, say, a 50K hire, which is a pretty good salary here in Madrid. It actually costs the company more or less 90K to have a bum on a seat for a year. That's a lot of money to get wrong. If you have a bad hire, really hard to recover from that. But what I want to point out, though, is I'm not mentioning this for doom and gloom. This is informational. As a candidate, you shouldn't worry about this, but I just want to clear up that on the other side, this is the context we have to deal with. You should be trying to maximize your salary. You should be looking for the best salary you can get and negotiate as hard as you can. Don't let this kind of scare you away from that. The other consideration is that good hire doesn't always equal a good employee. You got to remember, every time somebody's interviewing, it's a persona, it's a mask, it's not a real person. Everybody's on their best behavior. So you kind of have to look through that mask and see where their eyes light up and see what is pure posturing. The other thing is people can kind of pretend to be somebody for a couple of months. That's why we have probation periods. Because for the first couple of months, they're agreeable to everything. But then, of course, they get comfortable, they fall back into their old habits. It's normal, happens to everybody. You have to kind of divine whether they've got good habits or not, or if their bad habits are bad enough where you don't want to take them on. So with all that kind of context in mind, why we look at why people are not getting hired and why you're not even getting your first interview, never mind actually getting to a stage where there's a hiring decision, really boils down ostensibly to 2 things. The first is you're applying for the wrong jobs. These are the wrong jobs for you. They don't match your profile, they don't match your career path. And what it really boils down to is you're not able to demonstrate an ability or a history of delivery. The other side of it then is you're actually applying for the right jobs. Your career matches, your tools match, all the rest, but you're actually projecting the wrong image. You're not fitting what they want. And what it really boils down to is you're not showing a persona of enablement. We'll get to a definition of that later. But the end result is you're seen as a risky or a bad choice. I want to be clear that you're not seen as a bad engineer or bad developer. It's just that for the role that they have and for the limited resources that hiring managers and HR teams have and all the rest, they just don't really see it worth it to invest time in you to bring you through the rest of the pipeline. It's not malicious. It's really just a really bad cost-benefit analysis based on the information that we have. When we talk about applying for the wrong jobs, we say wrong and wrong for you given your career and skill set. Everybody in this room has fallen into the trap where you read a job description and you're like, hey, I can do this. Totally. And I would say in 80% of cases, that's 100% right. But can somebody who doesn't know you defend that? Can a hiring manager who's technical and they can see, okay, well these skills, they're transferable, it all matches up. Can they go to their non-technical boss who's the head of sales or the VP of marketing and actually fight that fight for you? In most cases, no, because that person's going to look at a CV, they're going to look at a job description, they're going to say, shit, these don't match. They're not the same words. That's what happens. But when we say wrong, what do we really mean by that? You should be looking for jobs that are compatible problem domains. If you spend 10 years in gaming, you're going to find it hard to get into somewhere like finance afterwards. Because there is different skills required, there's different knowledge you're supposed to know. The same if you go to health. I mean, in America, they have HIPAA, which is the legislation for storing health information. You have to be able to write code that conforms to the HIPAA legislation. Other problems are like, say, hard roads. You get an awful lot of people who are like senior engineers and they want to go to leadership. That's quite tough. And vice versa, if you're in a leadership role, a team lead, you're desperate to get out of somewhere, you end up going somewhere as a senior engineer. Unless you have a really good narrative, that's a hard road to go down. The same for employee to contractor and vice versa. Funnily enough, you wouldn't think there's a difference between these, but there is different mindsets in terms of responsibility and ownership. When you're an employee, you are going to get a call at 3 o'clock in the morning. You have to go fix what's there. You're in a contractor, you say, fuck you, pay me more money. Here's my hourly rate. But those attitudes don't transfer across the different types of roles. Obviously, skills and abilities. If you've been writing Java for the last 20 years, are you really going to get like a, front-end developer job? Probably not, because it's not as obvious that they're as transferable. But the main thing is your evidence of your ability and your history of delivery. And what it really boils down to is actually having really clear descriptions on your CV, on your LinkedIn, on your everything, of what you've actually built. The amount of CVs I see that people are just like, I did this job from this date to this date and I use Node.js. Okay, what did you do? What business problems did you solve? How did you help the company? Without that context, very hard to make a decision. Problem 2, right job, wrong image. What it really boils down to is to demonstrate a profile of enablement. This can mean different things to different companies, but the general rule is that you do your work the right way, put a little T in there, because everybody thinks their way is the right way. But realistically, this basically just means be the person who writes their tests, who writes their documentation, who turns up on time, who tests their code, being responsible, being professional, making deadlines, being the kind of person people want to work with. Actually being a nice person goes a long way in tech. You would be surprised. Being a clear communicator, so like if you're not going to meet your sprint goals, you mentioned that at the start of the sprint, not at the end. That's obviously really helpful. But these last two are probably the most important. The first one is awareness of how your technical actions affect the business. You're not being paid to write code. This is like a huge misconception. You're being paid to solve a problem for the business. Code, more than likely, is the medium for that, and that's great, but you've got other tools at your disposal. You got to understand that what you're doing is in the service of either making money for your employer, or creating opportunity for them, or reducing expenses. It usually falls along those lines. And the last, participating in the developer culture of your team. This gets overlooked and underestimated a lot, but being the person who shares links, who jumps on calls, who does impromptu code reviews, who does the demos and that sort of thing, goes a really long way. And your profile should indicate these as clearly as you can. And how do we demonstrate these? What is your profile? Well, we talk about the big 4. It's your CV, your resume, it's your LinkedIn, it's your GitHub, and it's your personal thing. We'll get back to that. You gotta be like 10 out of 10 on all fronts here. This sounds like an awful lot of work, and it actually is. It's a shitload of work. But we mentioned at the start, you're competing with over 250,000 more people this year because of the layoffs. Spending 2 to 4 weeks of this, actively working on it means not getting ghosted or rejected for the next 6 months or year or half a year and a half. You can use ChatGPT. It can do a lot of this shit for you. Einstein said insanity is doing the same thing over and over. The amount of people I see that just spray and pray, same CV, send it out to every single job posting that has roughly the same tags or the same technologies. It doesn't work, so stop doing it. Try something different. We talk about your CV and your resume. What's really nice, as a hiring manager and anyone who hires people like this, seeing a personalized CV per role, not just the same base CV that's sent out all the time. Sending an up-to-date CV, you would be surprised how many people send out CVs that are 2 years old, 3 years old. Okay, well if you can do that with something as important as your career, would you do that with a client document? Don't know. People tend to use technical terms and jargon like way too much. You gotta remember that your audience will include non-technical decision makers. We talked earlier about the head of sales and the VP of marketing. They're the people that are gonna sign the check. So they need to understand what's on your CV and not just be bamboozled with like different names. And also talking about the business problems that you solve. It's all well and good saying I built a REST API that does X, Y, and Z. Okay, well for who? What did it do? How did it make the company money? How did you help the team you're working on? The big one I see here in Madrid, unfortunately, is that people sending the CV not in the language of the job description. If there's an English job description out there, sending a CV in Spanish isn't really a great start. The person reading it may not speak Spanish, or may not have the patience to use Google Translate. You should do. Start with a really great base CV. Go to Fiverr, spend $50, get somebody to do it for you. It's a really great investment when you think about it, because spending that €50 means you can make 10 or 20K if you do a really good job hop. So I think it's kind of worth it. You should tailor that then to every individual job. Don't write a new one from scratch. Take your base one, change some keywords, and off you pop. Obviously you change it for the job description, so that means using the same phrases, the same keywords, all that sort of stuff. Where an awful lot of people fall down is not tailoring to both the company and the sector. When we think of the company, you go to any company you apply for, go to their main website, they've got a mission statement. Find the mission statement, find the keywords. I put Microsoft here as an example where they want to talk about empowering people and helping people achieve more. Empowering and achievement are words you should use all throughout your CV, because you want the person reading that to say, hey, they match the culture here. We're not going to have to try too hard, they're just going to slip in. And the same with sector. When you're talking about, like, say, a product company or a consulting team, you got to talk about your achievements in ways that make sense to those people. So if you're a product, you want to talk about KPIs. We increase user retention by 50% by making, images disappear in DMs after 24 hours. Great. Anybody who's doing product and look at KPIs, they understand the value that brings and you've achieved goals. If you talk about consulting companies, maybe you want to talk more about it in the context of actual money. So you say, hey, we help the client save 50% of their DevOps expenses by, using elastic scaling and adding life cycles to their assets and storage. Great. Consulting company can see that and they'll be like, okay, we know somebody we can sell that to, or we already sell that to somebody, so that's a shoe-in. That's fantastic. Another part of your big four, your LinkedIn, gotta have a maxed out profile. The amount of people I see where it's just their name and that's it, reuse your base CV, copy and paste the whole thing in. Super simple. Where people fall down as well is having up-to-date information. A lot of people do not have their actual city or location, which means you're not going to show up in job searches. Or if you do show up in job searches, someone's going to look at your profile and the first thing they see is like, okay, well, you're from Serbia or you're from Ireland. This job's in Madrid. They're not even going to read the rest of your profile. You're kind of out. Same with contact details. Keep them up to date, your experience, your achievements. Put skills on the individual work positions. I bet many of you don't know you can do this. You can do your big skill thing at the bottom, but on every single position, put the skills you've used, because that means you're going to show up in searches more. Having relevant connections, big thing as well. Build your internal network where you are. Even if you're planning to leave, add as many people as you can. Build those connections, try and maintain them, because you never know what's going to happen 5-10 years down the line. New job opens up, they've started a startup, they think of you, whatever. And everybody in DevMad, you've no excuse now, you've all met, you're all friends, add each other, please. You also have to add some content beyond job hops. It's really annoying when you go see someone's profile and it's just like, I went from here to there, I went from here to there, and that's it. Show your interest in your craft. Post some links, post some articles. You don't even have to write the articles, just find ones you like and post them. Congratulate your teammates on deadlines made, talk about wins. Show your authority in your craft. Another thing I don't think people realize you can do is you can put links everywhere. At the top, you've got an individual project section, you've got a publication section. Go wild, because the more links you have between your GitHub, your website, and all your other fun stuff, That's more social proof that you have. Really stands to your authority of what you're doing. Part of your big four as well is your GitHub. I don't know if this needs to be said, but I think it's very clear. No one plans to review your code. If we see a CV, if we see a GitHub, if we see whatever, we just don't have the time to sit down and go through everybody's achievements through your whole GitHub. If you want somebody to do that, try and pique their interest. Make it easy for them to do that. Only have a few projects. Should be your greatest hits and not your entire back catalog. Especially with senior developers, you go and you've got 20 years of projects. You just see hundreds of different projects. I don't even know where to start. So I leave. And have interesting projects. You see an awful lot of people and it's like, here's my to-do app, here's my blog, here's my Twitter clone. It's like, okay, well, we've seen hundreds of those. It's okay to have them if you're getting started, but as soon as you're able to do something else, do move on to something else. Go beyond boilerplate. An awful lot of people build great applications with Nest and Ruby and Rails, but it's literally just like using the platform for you. Do something a little bit more interesting. It doesn't have to be a totally unique idea, but it does have to be a unique implementation that demonstrates your skills in some way. What I highly recommend people do as well is have some kind of breakable toy. What we mean by breakable toy is if you're a REST API developer, have a super fucking REST API project on your GitHub. That's like all the techniques and you keep it up to date, and when new stuff happens, you give it a go. If you're applying for REST API jobs and the only thing on your GitHub are like, well, I don't know, here's some React apps and here's a little mobile app and some other fidgety shit, that doesn't really tell the story that you're good at what you do. Just something to bear in mind. Show your expertise in your domain. And another controversial point is like publish and deploy. The only software value is running software, which sounds really mean, but like if it's not actually running and executed somewhere, it's really just theory crafting. It also shows your ability and your ownership over the whole software development lifecycle. So it's not just, hey, I can write code, but it's like I can get it out there. And I know the right way to build it, and we've got some really nice quality checks in there. You can use GitHub Actions or whatever fun stuff, and actually get it deployed somewhere that somebody can run or they can use it. If you can't do it that way, maybe you've got a mobile app, like show links to the App Store. Here's my app in the App Store. That's some kind of proof that you do what you do. Problem people have is shoemaker's children syndrome. I don't know if anyone's heard this phrase in English, that the shoemaker's kids have the worst shoes. And it's true, because you see some amazing engineers and then you go to their GitHub and their code is trash. It works, okay, but like if you're looking for a job, you should be showing you can comment, you follow good design patterns, you follow the right architecture, and you make good decisions, your code is really clear, your naming conventions, your code formatting. Don't be the person that's let down because you have a really good idea and really good skill, but then you don't show that you can just follow good practices. Another thing is skimping on profile details like LinkedIn. You can put a photo, you can put an event section. The whole thing can be marked down, so you can do some really fucking cool stuff there. And pin the repos you want people to see. If you do have a couple of repos and you're like, well, I'd really like a recruiter to see this one particular one I'm proud of, pin it right there. The last thing about GitHub is green square anxiety. I see an awful lot of people that they have, their whole green square calendar, and it's just chock-a-block, full of stuff. But it's crap. It's like, hey, I updated a typo. I wrote an extra piece of documentation. I added a new property. There's no value in that. This is the green square contribution chart of somebody that interviewed with the CTO of Intel this year. And look how sparse that is. Anybody that cares, they don't really matter. Don't worry about it too much. The last thing I want to talk about is your big four is your thing. Keep your minds out of the gutter. You should have one though. It should be a website, it should be a podcast, it should be a blog, it can be a Twitter account, it can be something. But something that shows your authority in the craft. So I mean, like if you solve bugs, write a little blog post. Here's a bug I had, and here's how I solved it. Get onto other people's podcasts, get onto other people's channels. Participate in a local dev group, and you're all kind of doing that here today with DevMad. But you can all present next time. You should position yourself as an authority of your craft. Alex Ramazzi, I don't know if you guys know who this is. He owns a shitload of gym chains, he's super rich. But he says confidence comes as a result of evidence. And this is what your thing is. Everybody can have a CV, everybody can have a LinkedIn. You can pay people to make that shit for you, that's fine. But only you can put together something like this that's your secret sauce, so that's your personality, that is your choices, and it helps you stand out. But it also gives you something that those other things don't have, which is you can actually show your skills. So instead of just code, you can show your technical writing, you can show your planning, you can show diagrams, you could show what's called for nuances. I don't know if anyone's familiar with Aristotle's forms of knowledge. This is practical wisdom. So this is something I learned from doing something, not just something I read in a book or I learned on a course. really good way to get yourself out there and get ahead. Kind of done. I'll shut up now. We kind of learned today why you're not getting hired and what you can actually do about it and why that's happening. Hiring is super risky and it's super expensive. I don't know if anybody's actually had it explained to them before, but there it is. You need to apply for the right jobs. And by right jobs, I mean for you, given your career, given your profile, given where you are. You also need to show an image of enablement, which is super important. And how you do that is getting your big four together: your CV, your LinkedIn, your GitHub, and your thing. That's your secret sauce, and that helps show yourself as an targeted craft, and that's going to get you head and shoulders above everybody who doesn't do that. That's it. Any questions?
Probably I have one.
Go for it.
Okay, thank you. What do you think about XYZ formula in survey? Is it a good one or is it outdated one?
I've never even heard of it.
Oh, really? Really?
What I would say is, I mean, there's a whole lot of systems that are out there, right? And people say, like, if you're interviewing, you should follow STAR and all of these other fun things. As long as it looks reasonably cohesive and flows together, I'm sure that's fine.
Okay.
Make sense?
Yeah, makes sense.
Anybody else?
Any advice on finding your thing? I feel like that's what I'm doing right now with posting on LinkedIn.
Mm-hmm.
I think what I'm trying to do now is just try to focus on different things. Before is front-end web development, and I put like little advice about front-end web development, but now I'm working in Salesforce, so I'm putting motivational stuff. So I'm any advice on like how to find your thing, your niche?
I would say talk about things you're interested in. And if you're interested in Salesforce right now, that should be your focus, because you're going to be able to deliver the best content you can because it's something that excites you. If in 6 months' time you're like, fuck Salesforce, I'm sick of this now, I'm going back to front end, start doing front end again. That's fine. But just follow something that excites you, because that's where you're going to keep the momentum, and that's where you're going to like show yourself the best, I think.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Any? Oh wow, okay. You're going to be here a while. You were first?
Yeah. So technically, like all things which you describe, it's really cool and really, it's really true. But sometimes people are different, and so someone can have really, for example, soft skills, but for example, technical skills will be really shitty, or vice versa. And for example, somebody with great technical skills, who I don't know, knows a lot of stuff and so on, just don't know how to write sometimes a resume or something like this. I don't know, just don't like it or something like this.
Yeah.
How, for example, from your point of view, you can find these gems on the job market?
Well, we define gems. I think somebody who's hardcore technical but then can't actually communicate that typically tends to be a detractor from a team. We've all heard of like rockstar engineers and 10xers, or genius assholes, people call them. Sometimes you have to find the right balance, and that really depends on the culture of the team. You have some teams that are like super extroverted, they're all best friends after work and they've no problem talking to each other. You have other teams where they're all wizards in ivory towers and they hate each other. They all have 300 years experience. It really depends what your team's going to tolerate. And I think as a team lead or a hiring manager, you know your team best. And based on interviewing people, based on the CVs you see, you might say, okay, I can see this person fitting in here and not causing too much trouble, or I can see this person fitting in here and excelling. It really depends on your appetite of, well, how desperately do we need somebody? What projects do we have down the line? What are we willing to accept or not at that time? Does that make sense?
Yeah, makes sense.
Cool. Other people's? See a couple of hands. Yes, sir.
Okay, so a basic question actually. So you're working in like some enterprise, and most of your stuff you're doing under NDA, so you couldn't put like numbers. Like you have example with consulting, for example. In most cases, it's like normally very close team, so you can share like we saved this amount of money for this partner, for example, or just say just a number ever. So what should you do? Because like for big tech companies, it's much easier. You can just put like Apple, Google name, and most recruiters will like pass anything else. They will not matter. But if you work like for finance, for example, a lot of companies do not like inside of where people may know you, but outside it's like nothing for them, and you have nothing to put into like your CV.
I don't think that's true. I think you can anonymize what you have in your CV, certainly. So I mean, you don't have to mention company names, you don't have to mention specific numbers. You can talk about things just in terms of general terms like enablement. you can mention in an interview that you're under NDA, that you can discuss particular techniques in a generic way. And then we also talked about if you're a GitHub, I mean, you couldn't just have a breakable toy. You don't have to have every single commercial project you've ever worked on, but I mean, if you've typically built a mobile app for maybe a bank or whatever, I mean, have an example mobile app inside your GitHub. It doesn't have to be a banking app, it can be something else, but at least an example that you can do what you say you can do.
Okay.
But you don't really have to get into the details, and I think any hiring manager kind of knows that like depending on where you're coming from, there is confidential information you can't share, and we can ask questions around that.
It's interesting exercise to do it because like amount of information you can share, like it depends on situation, and that's interesting because like sometimes the jobs you just can't even mention that the job existed sometimes, basically. So it's interesting.
I spy.
No, I mean that.
No, but I mean, but that makes perfect sense. But imagine you did some secret work, I don't know, for Meta, just put it out there.
Yeah, but basically mentioning that you've done some stuff at a company will be like basically giving information to the market. It's like how like in game dev, for example, people find out that like new game is in the works because they hire someone and then put like that he works on something and you can match like things together. I mean,
there's always somebody who's going to be able to mind that. What I would say is that
it's a specific job actually, like data mining from like candidates information about like your competitors, what they're doing. You can do it like quite extensively actually, especially like in like game dev or technical companies sometimes.
I think anybody who is motivated to do that would find ways to do that anyway. I mean, I wouldn't worry. Being the lead, there's always a lead. It's always going to be somebody or somewhere. I wouldn't worry about that.
It's more about like like stick to NDA because like sticking to actual agreements is a good thing, I think. So it's just okay.
Cool. Okay. More questions? Sorry. Go ahead.
What's the influence of age on the hiring decision? Is it something that is fading or is still very important?
The really hard question is age typically translates to salary. To salary. That's what a lot of people don't admit. That you have somebody that's got 20 years experience, they're going to want a salary that matches that.
Yes, but if there is no such experience, somebody begins late.
And well, if somebody begins late, I mean, if somebody was older, but then they only had like a small amount of years of experience, I don't think age would factor too much. I think what people really care about is that you can turn up, you can do the work. And if anything, more mature candidates actually have it better because they've actually gone through life and they've had kids and they've had divorces and they've had different jobs and they've worked in different industries. So they're actually better equipped to deal with things like stress and stuff like that. So I wouldn't see it as a problem. The only way I see it as a problem is would it affect salary and does that person put that person out of the bounds of the Make sense?
Yep.
Cool. Yourself, sir?
Yes. What do you think about the cover there? It's a good idea to include it to your application to maybe add some personalized application for the job.
Yes and no. A lot of people include them as a formality. I've never written one in my entire life. I can see the need for them, to be honest, but I think it is you're selling time to a clock, right? It's not real. It's part of that mask I talked about. It's part of a persona where you're like, I love all these things and I'll turn up at 8 o'clock every day and leave at 12 o'clock every night. You have to look past it and see what's the truth in it. So I mean, as long as maybe it's not too flowery and it's not overly formal, I mean, I could see some benefit there as it being supplemental to your CV, but I certainly wouldn't see it as necessary. But other hiring managers would have different experiences and different ideas. So if you're not comfortable, don't risk it. I don't know.
Okay, thank you.
Cool. Anybody else? Yourself?
Yeah, I have a question. You mentioned earlier like the big four, right? Right, the CV, the LinkedIn, and all that. So imagine that you just have one of them, just the CV, right? So as we also point out through the presentation, you have to invest time developing or working through those three stuff,
Yes.
right? So what do you recommend for someone that just have the CV to start working on the other three?
Makes sense. What I would say is plan. I mean, if you've got your CV, the next logical step is your LinkedIn. Because you can take your CV and just copy paste it into your LinkedIn. You're halfway there. Your skills and all the rest, I mean, will take you like, what, 2 or 3 hours to fill out if you want to be really nitpicky about going into every single individual job and all the rest. Once you have the two of those together, the next step is your GitHub. Your GitHub obviously demonstrates your authority of the craft, that people can see you can do what you say you can do. That's not something you put together over like a weekend. But obviously you have projects you worked on maybe in college or maybe in like different things you build on the side. You build them up over time. So, I mean, your first projects you put in maybe won't be great, but as your ability increases, so will the quality of your projects. You'll retire the older ones that aren't really that great, and you'll kind of promote the new ones that are a little bit better as your knowledge grows. And then in terms of building your thing, which is the fourth one, I mean, that's super easy. Start an Instagram account and just even talk about your learner journey, because that's interesting for people too, that it's not just like, hey, I've got 20 years experience and I'm going to tell you everything works. It's actually nice to see the other side where somebody's like, hey, I just learned what like binary search is today, and here's my explanation of that in my words. It's like, that's really cool that like somebody understood that, and also your explanation might help the next person understand. So I mean, your big four, your social profile or whatever, you could start that right now on your way home on the metro. Your LinkedIn comes from your CV, and then your GitHub is just going to take time to build up if you don't have time in the industry. You'll get there. Thank you. Lots more hands. Yourself in the back. Yep, yourself.
In regards to soft skills, do you think it's a good idea to put them on your CV? Because personally, most of the time when I see a CV that has them listed, I see it as a little bit cheesy. And always I avoid putting them. I think my CVs are mostly technical most of the time.
Depends what you're looking for. I think when you're heading towards the senior track, I think you should be putting on things like, hey, I do code reviews and I do write documentation, because that's important. But if you're like, you know, I'm a dynamic person and all, I mean, that's flowery bullshit. That doesn't make sense to anybody, right? But I think there's a balance. But I think as you move up towards senior and then onto leadership, those skills take center place more. So that's when you should focus on those. But if you're like junior, mid-level, you know, starting senior, maybe it's not as important. But I think you've got to have your bullshit detector on. I think it's the important thing. You had your hand up for a while, sorry. Didn't mean to skip you.
About salary negotiation, who should announce first the salary range or the salary expectation? Because the HR manager always asks what is salary expectation, and from another side, he has for that position range of the most range of salary. So
yeah, a lot of people see it as like a Mexican standoff, like the person who shoots first is the weakest, and it's not. Don't bullshit around. If you want 100K, ask for 100K. It might be out of the range, you know, straight away, it's in the range where it's not, and off you go. I wouldn't, there's a phrase in English that like 1 in the hand is better than 2 in the bush. If you suddenly learn out later on that the range was up to 120K, okay, you'll be mad you didn't get to 120. But if you go in from the start and you're like, okay, my number is 100, I want 100, and they say, cool, we can give you 100. You're happy. You know, they're happy it's within range, you're happy you get what you want. Don't play around with these things. If you want something, just ask for it. I don't think there's a need to go back and forward and who blinks first or whatever, right? That makes sense? Is that cool?
yeah.
Okay, cool. Dude with the glasses, I think you had your hand up next.
How do you think ChatGPT affects the hiring process in both ends? I recently saw a news article about a person who hooked up ChatGPT in Whisper and basically aced all the interviews in totally high class.
I'd seen that video. It was really cool. I was impressed.
Yeah, it's
what I would say
it's
is
scary.
AI is weird. I think there is a future where AI is going to do the majority of the work for us. And where an awful lot of developers come in then is the human factor in terms of judgment, sprucing it up, and all the things that the machine can't think of. I mean, maybe going as far as the Whisper example, that's a bit much, right? Because you're kind of misrepresenting your own skills. But I mean, like, I would expect people to use ChatGPT to write their cover letter, to write their CV, to help write their blog articles, and all that kind of stuff. That's just kind of the world we live in now. That doesn't take away from people's skill, it actually adds to it. Being able to discern if what's written is what you want, to refine that and put your own stamp of personality on it. When it comes to the Whisper case, when somebody actually then goes and gets that job, I mean, can they do the job? If they can use AI and they can deliver every single day, I don't think anybody cares. as long as they're not doing like shit where they're putting company code in and that goes off to a server somewhere and is stolen, right? I think if you're just smart about it, you're getting your job done and delivering. I don't really see a problem with using AI. Where I see a problem with using AI is maybe on the flip side as a hiring manager, using that to decide on candidates. I don't agree on that, because I think humans should review CVs and try and, as we said, put on your bullshit detector and decide who is behind the CV, who's behind that mask, and if they're interesting or not to hire. So I disagree with using it on that side, but on the candidate side, I mean, fuck it. Use what you can. And yourself, yeah, you had your hand up?
So I just changed my career recently. So for my past 10 years, I was doing something that has totally nothing to do with technology. So about that, how do you suggest me to do with my CV? Like, should I leave something there, or should I just reduce it?
I would put on your past life, where you worked, what you did, but maybe frame the skills in a way that makes it interesting for tech. So just to put it out there, imagine you worked as a barista, okay? Making coffees, not really interesting to tech. Dealing with customers every day, dealing with stress, you know, meeting deadlines, maybe you like cash out the tills, that's a position of responsibility, okay? Maybe things like ordering, inventory management, all that other fun stuff. You can sell those because they're transferable. And then over time, as you build up your CV in tech, you start retiring the items that then don't make as much sense. Because you'll have more positions where you're like, okay, well, this was a tech role. I can talk more about actual proper tech stuff here. But definitely put them there if you're getting started and make the use of them. But just frame them in a way that's interesting in a business sense. Yeah. Cool. Yes, sir.
So I would love about your experience as a hiring manager. What do you think the market is craving? I mean, they don't have those 4 key things that are important, or is the attitude, or what is that? And also, where are you dropping more people on the list of items that you do during the interview? Is it technical thing, cultural thing? Or?
Sure. That's like 10 questions. I'll answer your last one first. Where do we see the most drop off? I would say the majority of people we drop off is at the application phase, because people just spray and pray. They come from all sorts of different roles, all sorts of technologies, and they'll just apply to roles just to see if they get a bite. But I mean, you would straight away see it's like, okay, well, this person is a technical architect. Why are they applying for a mid-level developer role?
Yeah.
You see an awful lot of that, and that's where we cut out the majority of people. The next place we would cut out most people would be an interview with the hiring manager, which is kind of a mix between culture and technical fit, but it's just kind of like the first kind of feel you get for somebody. And you can kind of tell within the first 5-10 minutes of like, okay, this person is interesting, or just this person's not interested in this role, or not right for this role. We talked earlier about someone being a detractor from the team. Maybe you can tell it from their personality straight away. But that's generally the 2 places where we would see candidates fall off the most. Can't remember your first question, if you want to remind me.
About the market, what do the candidates fear? They don't have those 4 things that are important. I mean, the CV is not good, or they think it's not good enough.
Depending on who you ask, people will say it's a candidate's market or it's a business market. And it really depends on the company. So like when we talked about the people that were laid off earlier, that's like you see companies like Microsoft and Meta, they've laid off like 15% of their engineering team. It really depends. There's a lot of companies out there that are eager to take up new talent now that they've cleared out an awful lot of the older, the hangarounds that have been around for 10 million years that they couldn't get rid of, they just got rid of them. So they're like, let's get new talent. And that's where people that don't have these things, but they do have a good CV and they're eager, maybe they're good at networking, they can get a foot in the door. But then as we said, headcount, it's much lower now, the budget for hiring is lower. There's other companies where they're like, we only want to invest in a senior because we want them to do the work of AP. So it really depends on a company by company basis. It's kind of a bullshitty answer, I'm sorry. That's kind of how I see it. I don't think there's a clear, it's a candidate's market or it's an employer's market. I think it's wishy-washy depending on company sector, company size, and all that other fun stuff.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes.
I have a curious question.
Go for it.
For hiring, for example, I'm also looking for like candidates in my team. Are you most comfortable working with a hero type of mentality or team player type of mentality? A hero that makes decision by himself or makes decision with you?
Depends on the culture of the team. For me, I mean, there's an awful lot of teams where they're just like, we need somebody to come in and just kick out from day one. And we give them the tools they need and they just fuck off and make us money. Okay? But that's seriously, that's what an awful lot of teams want. But on the flip side of that, and maybe teams like my own, where I'm like super big on teamwork, because you can do big things on your own, but I think you can do bigger things together as a team.
Yeah.
Different experiences, different cultures, different points of view really add up to make a better product, in my opinion. But I would say it really depends on the individual team's culture, what you can stomach, what you're looking for, what your needs are.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, makes sense.
Cool. Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know how over time we are, so I'm really sorry about that.
Yeah.
But if anyone has more questions, find me later. We'll have a beer and we'll chat it out. Thanks very much for your time, folks.